Unifor files to represent Amazon workers in British Columbia. Councillors in the regional municipality of Armstrong in Manitoba resign en masse, triggering a crisis of quorum. More than 1 in 4 young people's deaths in Canada are caused by toxic drugs. Azerbaijan rejects Armenia's claims of ethnic cleansing at the International Court of Justice, and protests in Georgia condemn a law that will force groups to register if they receive 20% or more of their funding from foreign sources. That's Georgia, the country, not USA. Good morning. It's Tuesday, April 16th. I'm Nora. Here are your headlines. We start this morning in Delta and New Westminster, where Unifor has filed to represent Amazon fulfillment workers in both cities. The unionization drive started in July and card signing started in October. The article from the Canadian Press pivots to the U.S. to remind us about the Staten Island victory at Amazon there from the Amazon Labor Union. That site remains the only unionized Amazon location in North America, despite the efforts made by other unions, including the Teamsters and the RWDSU. Now, that union I have the pleasure of watching closer than other American unions, and their fights for Amazon unionization have been intense. Now, Unifor waits to see if they hit the 55% threshold of members who signed cards. If they did, the union will be recognized. If they only hit 45% of the workers, there will have to be a vote to finalize union representation. The Canadian Press doesn't mention this, but being able to form a union based on signing cards alone is not something you can do in every province, nor have workers been able to do it in BC for a long time. The BC government brought back this protocol called card check certification as a basic right for a majority of workers to not have their union drives be bogged down by votes if a majority of workers have already filled out a union card. So my fingers are crossed that Unifor hit that 55%. The problem, of course, is that it can be difficult to know whether or not a union has hit 55% of all employees. Often, the total number of who a company considers to be employees isn't divulged to the union, and so there's lots of guessing that has to happen when organizers are signing up new members. We'll have to wait and see. Amazon said that unions are unnecessary because their workers already have safe, inclusive workplaces with good pay, health benefits, and, quote, opportunities for career growth, unquote. Next to the regional municipality of Armstrong in Manitoba, where there's been a mass exodus of the municipal council. Armstrong is located just north of Winnipeg. CTV's Danton Unger reports that 4 of 6 council members have resigned from the council. The reason for why they resigned, well, no one seems to know or wants to say. The municipality's interim chief administrative officer, Nancy Howell, said that she couldn't say why and refused CTV an interview. Howell did say that they've kept the province in the loop about what's going on, as ultimately the province will be responsible to make sure the municipality can continue to function. Because of the resignations, the municipality doesn't have quorum. Normally, an administrator would be appointed and an election would be called after. The article does make cryptic references to, quote, a harassment issue within the municipality, unquote, and that the Manitoba Workplace Safety and Health Board has had to step in. But neither Reeve Kate Bassford nor the Safety Board shared any information about the resignation of the councillors. Now, this article is from CTV, but if you read the CBC article, they did manage to get an interview with one of the councillors, Pat Stein, who said that the resignations happened because people were, quote, forced to step down in order to put a halt to the toxic work environment, unquote, but didn't elaborate further. The big question is whether or not the mass resignations will also trigger a re-election for the current sitting Reeve. She was duly elected and hasn't resigned and doesn't think that she needs to go through another election. Well, it kind of seems like councillors have used the mass resignations as a tactic to force stop the operations of the municipality and have new elections. Now to shocking news about how many people are dying in Canada from opioids. In 2021 alone, more than 1 in 4 deaths among young people was related to opioids. The biggest jump of deaths was in the prairie provinces. In Manitoba, the death rate rose by more than 5 times what it was in 2019 for people aged 30 to 39 related to opioids. In Saskatchewan, the rate of deaths tripled, and in Alberta, it spiked more than 2.5 times. To put those numbers into rates, Alberta had 729 deaths per million people. Saskatchewan had 424 deaths per million, Manitoba had 500 deaths per million, and Ontario had 384 deaths per million. BC was at 394 deaths per million and a rate of change that was lower than other provinces. So in case you missed all those numbers, Alberta far out ahead of the other provinces for deaths per million people related to opioids, 729, almost more than double of where BC and Ontario are at. And more than 70% of the deaths happened among men. Overall, the number of deaths went from 3,007 in 2019 to 6,222 in 2021. The article from Camille Baines from the Canadian Press, as it appeared at CBC, makes note that Alberta is testing a strategy that does not use safe supply or harm reduction. Instead, it will force abstinence onto people. Something that you will know if you listen to this podcast daily is useless at best and will kill people at worst. Considering how Alberta is currently the most deadly place in Canada for these kinds of deaths, their decision to go this route is frankly shocking and disgusting. Now to international news. Armenia has brought Azerbaijan to the International Court of Justice on charges of ethnic cleansing. Azerbaijan, unsurprisingly, rejects the case. The tensions are over the Nagorno-Karabakh region, where in 2020, more than 6,600 people were killed over the two countries' war over claim of the land. A ceasefire agreement gave Azerbaijan control over parts of the region. Then in 2023, Azerbaijan, quote, waged a lightning military campaign, unquote, which pushed out most of the 120,000 residents of the region. Armenia argues that Azerbaijan has allowed hate speech against Armenia, reports Al Jazeera. There is also a counter case at the ICJ lodged by Azerbaijan. A peace process that has been in place since December has tried to get both sides to negotiate a treaty, but Armenia has opposed Azerbaijan's encroachment on certain areas considered by Armenia its territory. The region is technically controlled by Azerbaijan, but there are independence movements of ethnic Armenians who are supported by Armenia who have control of parts of the region as well. The conflict goes back to World War I. And finally, we'll stay in the region but go to Georgia. The BBC is reporting that protests broke out in Tbilisi against a law that will require NGOs and media outlets that receive more than 20% of their funding from outside of Georgia to register formally as an organization serving a foreign power. A similar law was withdrawn last year after people mobilized against it. Georgia's government says that they need this law to show where groups are getting their money. Opponents of the law say that it will crush critics and stop Georgia from being able to join the EU. And they point to a similar law that Putin passed in Russia. The government denies that this law has anything to do with Russia. In a recent session debating it, a brawl between opposing sides broke out. You can see an opposition MP clocking a government MP at the BBC's news site, if that's something you feel like you need to see. Both the EU and the US have condemned the proposed bill. Those are your headlines for Tuesday, April 16th. I'm Nora. It's Tuesday. It's Sandy and Nora Day. That means a new episode is coming out. We talk about all of the rhetoric around World War III and what it's like to have a rational state actor like Iran do a shock and awe campaign that kills nobody versus an irrational actor like Israel, which is hellbent on killing many, many people. Fingers crossed that rational heads prevail, of course, in Israel as well. You are listening to this podcast at sandynora.com, on the Real News Network podcast feed, and anywhere you get your podcasts. The next episode drops in a couple of hours, so keep your headphones in your ears. Actually, don't. I think that people should listen to the outside a lot more than they do. I will talk to you tomorrow.